Hey guys, welcome back to Hands On Channel. I've got something kind of wild to share with you here today. Today I was doing a little show prep and doing a little research for something I've got kind of working on the back burner here, and possibly was going to put out something in the future about this. But this article kind of summarized my position, and it came from a very unlikely source. The last place I ever would have looked. It came from CNN. I was like, holy crap! And it was from September 1st, 2020. So Donald Trump was still president of the United States, and at least as far as we knew then, there was going to be a fair election coming up and all that, and blah, blah, blah. The rest is history. We've seen it all happen. I'm not going to go over all that. But what I wanted to talk to you about was what I found in this article that was so compelling. So let's get right into this, because I think the article does a really good job of basically telling the truth, telling it like it is. And the headline reads, "Past disasters show why rushing a coronavirus V now would be colossally stupid." And it was written by Jen Christensen on September 1st, 2020. Highly recommend you go check this article out. It's probably, like I said, one of the rare times in history that CNN has actually told the truth. So, I mean, this is colossal news here. Just that alone, just that fact alone, that they actually did real reporting back then, but only because it hurt Trump. That's why they allowed this to go forward, or they thought it would. So let's get into this. Experts are warning the federal government against rushing out a coronavirus V before testing has shown it is both safe and effective. Decades of history show why they are right. Okay, the FDA signals V could greenlight early. Their concern that the FDA may be moving too quickly heightened when FDA Commissioner Dr. Stephen Hahn told the Financial Times that his agency could consider an emergency use authorization, EUA, for a CoMI-19V before late-stage clinical trials are complete. If the data shows strong enough evidence, it would protect people. So that's what that guy said. He was the FDA commissioner under Donald Trump. I'm not sure if he's still there or not. So it says here in this article, the commissioner has the authority to allow unapproved medical products to be used in an emergency when there are no adequate or approved alternatives. And EUA is not the same as full approval, and it can be withdrawn. So, interestingly enough, they said a whole lot right there. FDA commissioner has the authority to allow unapproved medical products to be used in an emergency when there are no adequate or approved alternatives. And I think that would explain why we saw so much pushback. And I have to be really careful about this, because YouTube has 3 or 4 medications that I'm not allowed to say. And at least the last time I looked at their guidelines, community guidelines or standards or whatever the hell they call them, basically there were 3 or 4 medicines on there. HCQ is one of them. IV Mectin is another one. So there are some things I'm not allowed to say on here, so we're going to have to kind of dance around that in this article. But this is a mouthful. The reason why they don't want to allow IV Mectin and other alternatives, just all the things you're hearing about other people, other treatments that have nothing to do with taking a V. The reason they don't want those to be out and to be known, and the reason they're calling one of those horse medication and stuff like that, and trying to discredit it in the public. I mean, even in, where was that? I think that was Oklahoma, the Rolling Stone, or maybe it was Texas, but Oklahoma or Texas, somebody did an article in the Rolling Stone, and all the other news media agencies picked it up, and they were saying that people were going into the emergency room for like gunshot wounds. I think it was Oklahoma. And they were saying that the ERs were so backed up from people who had OD'd on IV Mectin. So they were trying to say that all these people had OD'd, and it was stopping like gunshot and stabbing victims from getting into the emergency room. Well, later on, after some more investigation turned up, it turns out the guy that had given that report didn't even work for the hospital for like the last 3 months, and he had no idea, but he did have a political agenda, and that agenda was to push the V. So very interesting. It all turned out to be a lie. There was no point where the Oklahoma or maybe it was Texas hospitals were backed up. But yet the Rolling Stone went in, didn't do any research, and just took this guy's word and ran with it and printed a story. And then all of the other papers picked up on it. So do you think for a second that they put their retraction on the front page of the presses like they do whenever they have a bombshell story like that? Because they were trying to push their agenda. Their agenda is get everybody to take the V. Do not take any other alternative medications because that's not going to promote the V. So anyways, I don't want to spend too much time on each one of these things, but I thought that was very interesting the way that was structured right there. So let's talk about V approval. What does that mean? Of course, they're changing the definitions all the time, so it could be changed by now. But at the time this article was written, this is what Jen Christensen wrote about that. For a V to be FDA approved, scientists must gather enough data through clinical trials in large numbers of volunteers to prove it is safe and effective at protecting people against a disease. Now, a question could be raised right here. Is this thing that they're putting out right now safe and effective? And does it protect people or prevent the disease or prevent the spread of the disease? I don't know. I mean, there are some compelling arguments that it really doesn't, and that you really don't need the thing because you have a 99.9 or 99.8% chance of survival. And of course that number drops off the older you get. So if you're like 70 plus, it may only be 99.7 or 99.6, but it's still 99 freaking percent chance you're going to survive for this thing. So I saw another article today, kind of off topic here, but it just sparked into my mind that, they did a study, I believe it was in California, where children, young boys that were like under 18, I don't remember what the age group was, but they were young boys, were 6 times more likely to have severe negative side effects from taking the V and being hospitalized than they were to just get the coronavirus. So, this is just completely ludicrous what's going on in our country. So I wanted to get to the bottom of it. Where does this come from? What did we do in the past? Back when we still had common sense and people that had common sense running our organizations. So let's get into this. Once data is collected, FDA advisors usually spend months considering it. So, they got to really, really dig in to find out if this stuff's going to have long-lasting negative side effects. And I would argue they have not done those tests and those studies. Okay, so this is what happened with the HCQ. The FDA granted an EUA to the drugs, much praised by Donald Trump on March 28th. It subsequently revoked its EUA in June after studies showed they were not effective and could also potentially cause serious heart problems. The first time I ever heard anything about the HCQ related to the coronavirus, I believe it was the Australians that had first figured that out. Some Australian scientists had said, we've had some positive results from giving people this HCQ. And they were looking for ways to treat this thing, and with existing medicines that were cheap and readily available. Well, the problem is you got groups like Pfizer and, Johnson & Johnson, whatever the other one is, that they don't want to sell you the same old thing that they already have. They want to make something new and expensive. The federal government's telling you it's free. Well, guess what, Joe Biden? Somebody's having to pay for that crap. It's called the taxpayers. That's who's paying for it. It ain't free. You ain't spending government money. You're spending our money on this stuff. So who knows what they're charging the federal government for each dose of this Frankenshot, I guess we'll call it, for lack of a better understanding of what this really is, because I don't think anyone really knows or was really saying what is truly in this V. And that's one of the requirements. You're supposed to be able to know what the ingredients are of something they're pumping into your body, but yet I've heard no mention coming out of the United States anyways of what's in this thing. Interestingly enough, the Japanese, I believe it was, last week discovered some of their Vs actually were full of stainless steel and other weird stuff that shouldn't have been in there. And they pulled the plug on that project. They were like, no, we're not doing this, because they still have common sense. They're not under the hypnosis of the mainstream media like the American people and the American government are. So let's get in. Mini rant concluded. Let's get back into this. So that's what happened to the HCQ, and I would argue probably the IV Mectin as well, that, possibly they've done some tests on that, and the FDA is saying, no, this doesn't do anything. This doesn't help. It's only good for horses. Don't take this stuff. And yet we have people like Joe Rogan, who made huge headlines last week when he came down with the coronavirus, and he went and took I don't know if he did HCQ, but he definitely did IV Mectin, the supposed horse medicine, and he healed up in like 2 or 3 days. Or I believe he said it was like hours later, 5 hours later, he was feeling better, if I'm not mistaken. So I mean, a lot of people apparently are having pretty positive results with that. Well, if the FDA approved that as a treatment for the Rona, then they wouldn't be able to give EUA to their experimental Frankenshots. That's the gist of it, guys. And that really didn't click to me until I read this article. So again, I am blown away that CNN's reporter, Jen Christensen, back in September 1st, 2020, actually was doing real news, and it got swept under the rug. You know why, Jen Christensen? You know why no one saw this article? It's because all you guys ever do is cry wolf all the time. And then that means the time when the wolf is really there and there really is something there and you're really spouting some real truth, nobody believes you. Nobody even reads it, because why would anybody go to CNN for news especially? So anyhow, let's get back into this. An EUA is much quicker. Obviously, an EUA is a much quicker option than full approval. So only once before in history has the FDA given a V this lesser standard of approval of an EUA. But it was an unusual circumstance. So some soldiers had sued, claiming that the mandatory anthrax V made them sick, and a judge put a hold on the program. The Department of Defense asked for an EUA that overrode the court's ruling in 2005 so it could continue to V military personnel, this time on a voluntary basis, though. So they weren't able to force it on them. They could only do it on a voluntary basis. But we all know what that means. You know, if you're a young guy, fresh out of mom and dad's house, fresh out of high school, and you're sitting in there and the military doctor's telling you, oh yeah, you need this V here because, you know, you could go overseas somewhere and you could possibly pick up the monkey flu or some other, you know, swine flu or all these other things. So we're going to get into that stuff here in a minute. This is Bombshell, guys. So I hope you're enjoying this, because it really tickled me to see all of this stuff coming from, of all places, CNN. I just thought it was very bizarre. Otherwise, Vs have had to go through the entire clinical trial process and FDA approval process, which can take months or years. So think about how fast they fast-tracked this whole, what do they call it, Operation Warp Speed or whatever, all this, you know, Star Trek references and stuff. And I'm not saying they shouldn't have tried to speed up the process and get a safe and effective V ready to fight this thing. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying they shouldn't have tried it. What I'm saying is they shouldn't have granted the EUA and skipped all of the animal and human trials and other things like that and ruined the basically science of the whole project by allowing people that were supposed to be in the control group, they were giving them a placebo. Those people eventually ended up taking the V anyway, so the whole control group is all screwed up. So everything about this whole deal has just been flying by the seat of their pants, and yet they have given it an EUA, and now the president of the United States is trying to get 100 million more people to take this experimental frickin' shot. And, you know, I'm not down for that. So let's finally get into some of the history here. So we're going to go way back here. This incident was called the Cutter incident, and you older people that were alive a lot longer than me, you probably remember this stuff. But on April 12th, 1955, the U.S. government announced the first V to protect kids against polio. Within days, labs had made thousands of lots of the V. So batches made by one company, Cutter Labs, accidentally contained live polio virus, and it caused an outbreak. More than 200,000 children got the polio V. But within days, the government had to abandon the program. 40,000 kids got polio. Some had low levels, a couple of hundred were left with paralysis, and about 10 died, said Dr. Howard Merkel, a pediatrician, distinguished professor, and director of the Center for History of Medicine at the University of Michigan. The government suspended the V program until it could determine what went wrong. So think about that. 200,000 kids got the polio V, and they had to abandon the program because 10 kids died and a couple of hundred were left with paralysis. So let's do a little compare and contrast. How many people have died, according to the VAERS site, today from this experimental EUA, and how many have had permanent, long-lasting side effects, lifetime side effects from this thing, compared to what happened at the Cutter incident in 1955? I would argue it's a hell of a lot more right now today. But back then, in 1955, they still had enough sense to go, hey, wait a minute, 10 people died, and hundreds of them have permanently been left with paralysis. So we should stop this. And they did. So then there's this thing that's tied in with this called monkey trouble. However, increased oversight failed to discover another problem with the polio V. From 1955 to 1963, between 10 and 30% of polio Vs were contaminated with the simian virus 40, so SV40. So 10 to 30% of polio Vs were contaminated with simian virus 40. The way they would grow the virus was on monkey tissue. These rhesus macaques were imported from India, tens of thousands of them. Medical anthropologist S. Lachlan Jane said, they were gang caged in those conditions. The ones that didn't die on the journey, many got sick, and the virus spread quickly, added Jane, who taught history of V's course at Stanford and is working on a publication about the incident. Scientists wrongly thought the formaldehyde they used would kill the virus. It was being transferred to millions of Americans, Jane said. Many believe this issue wasn't adequately pursued, Jane said. Some studies showed a possible link between the virus and cancer. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control website, however, said most studies are reassuring to find no link. So be reassured. The CDC said that there was no link. So you can rest easy now, because we can trust them, that's for sure, right? So no current Vs contain the SV40 virus, the CDC says, and there's no evidence that contamination harmed anyone. Well, maybe not. Maybe it didn't harm anyone. Maybe it wasn't reported. Maybe they took the V and something else happened, and the doctor at the time in the 50s and 60s didn't have the technology to do a thorough investigation, and he blamed it on something else. I mean, I don't know. That's just wild speculation, but I could only imagine. I mean, there was a time in history when they actually put leeches on people, and they thought that that was approved proper medicine. So this is the biggest one, and the best argument against what the United States and the CDC and Joe Biden and the FDA and the WHO and the UN and all of these people, the New World Order, all of these people that are stacked up against us for wanting to have health, liberty, they need to go back and read this history right here. This is bombshell stuff right here. The real reason I wanted to make this video. The epidemic that never was. So did you know in 1976, scientists predicted a pandemic of a new strain of influenza called swine flu. More than 40 years later, some historians call it flu epidemic that never was. President Ford was basically told by his advisors that look, we have a pandemic flu coming called swine flu that may be as bad as a Spanish flu, said Michael Kinch, a professor of radiation oncology in the School of Medicine at Washington University in St. Louis. His latest book, Between Hope and Fear, explores the history of V's. So President Ford's advisors, let's go back over that again. So President Ford's advisors, honestly, I'm surprised it wasn't Anthony Fauci even way back then. He may have been a youngin' back then, but I bet you he was in the administration somewhere or in the FDA or something or the NIH or one of these organizations, because these people are lifers. So he was basically cajoled to put forward a V that was hastily put together. When you have a brand new strain situation like that, they had to do it on the fly, Kinch said. So Ford made the decision to make immunization compulsory. That means he was going to make it mandatory for everyone. The government launched the program in about 7 months, and 40 million people got V'd against swine flu, according to the CDC. That V campaign was later linked to cases of a neurological disorder called Guillain-Barré. Interestingly enough, these V's today are also linked to Guillain-Barré syndrome as one of the possible side effects, although I don't believe they're saying that on the warning label when you go in to take the thing. So it's just one of those things that if it happens to you, you'll just be another one of those uncounted statistics. But they're saying it's not definitive. The CDC said the increased risk was about one additional case of Guillain-Barré for every 100,000 people who got the swine flu V. Due to this small association, the government stopped the program to investigate. 1 in 100,000 people, and there was only an increased risk, they said. So it was kind of a fiasco, Markle said. The good news is that there never was an epidemic of swine flu, so we were safe. But that shows what could happen. Isn't that interesting? So, again, just going to prove that people can be misled by the federal government. It happens all the time. It's happened in our history over and over and over again, guys. That's why I'm reading this stuff to you. And plus, if I don't read it to you, no one will ever hear about this because, again, it's on CNN. So all of this stuff and other things that were going on, like Vietnam and Watergate, all these other things that were going on, civil rights, that made the American people very distrustful at the time of the government in general. So they weren't very trusting in the V's because they'd seen a lot of stuff. People that were alive that remembered seeing all the polio kids and stuff like that, they weren't about to trust the government again because they'd already burned that bridge by lying to them and putting out something that caused a whole bunch of, really, really bad side effects and 10 deaths. So they stopped that, over 10 deaths and hundreds of cases of permanent paralyzation. And yet the things we have going on today are way, way worse than that, and they're doing nothing about it. So let's get back into this. Markle said that led to a real distrust of authorities and federal government, and it extended to doctors and scientists. And that's only progressed as time has gone along. Markle said people's mistrust of the system makes the idea that the FDA would rush this process before late-stage clinical trials are complete colossally stupid. This is one of the most ridiculous things I've heard this administration say. Of course, he's talking about the Trump administration. Guarantee you, this Markle character probably ain't saying jack squat now, so trying to keep it PG here. All it takes is one bad side effect to basically botch a V program that we desperately need against this virus. It is a prescription for disaster. FDA Commissioner Hahn said that the V decision will be based on data, not politics. This could do substantial damage, Kinch said. Kinch, who is a patient in one of the V trials himself, said the clinical trial process needs to be followed to the end. A too early EUA for a V could cause a nightmare scenario for a few reasons. 1. The V may not be safe. 2. If it is not safe, people will lose faith in Vs. 3. If a V doesn't offer complete protection, people will have a false sense of security and increase their risk. 4. If a substandard V gets an EUA, a better V may never get approval because people will be reluctant to enroll in trials and risk getting placed on a placebo instead of a V. People are going to die unnecessarily if we take chances with this, Kinch said. We've got to get this right. And I agree 100%. 100%. Never, ever in my life have I agreed 100% with a CNN article. But guys, this is freaking bombshell. They told the truth, but it only because Donald Trump was the commander-in-chief and the president of the United States at the time, and they were trying to hurt them. At least that's my feeling, because I don't hear these same people saying anything now. I'm going to go do a little more homework and see if this guy Markle or Kinch or the person that actually wrote this article is doing anything equivalent to this in 2021 under Joe Biden's regime. I doubt very, very seriously they are, because it's double standard. It's rules for thee, not for me. So have you guys heard that, many of the federal employees are going to be exempted from this mandated V that Biden was just talking about and spouting off on the other day when he was basically declaring himself a tyrant, or at least implementing tyrannical rules for the United States that are unconstitutional, and he does not have the authority to do. Did you hear that? He does not have the authority to do that. So, guys, we're in some crazy ass times right now, no doubt about it. Do what you want. I have never told anybody whether they should get a V or not get a V. As for me, I stand for liberty, and that means health liberty. That means your health liberty, even if you and I disagree. That's what being an American is all about. Remember that old thing about freedom of speech that, as bad as we hated hearing people say things that were derogatory toward the United States, it was their right, and we would defend their right to say those things because we didn't want to live in the USSR or communist China. Well, now things are happening in this country that make me think, in some ways, maybe even many ways, we are rapidly approaching a time when we will be unsavable from that fate. It'll be too late to recover. So guys, do what you want to do for your family, but do your research. Go read this article for yourself. Maybe you'll interpret something a little differently. I didn't read 100% of it. I skipped a little bit of it where they were complaining about all the different things that was going on back in the 70s and stuff. But go read this article for yourself. You'll see it. It's like I said, it's like the Holy Grail. I mean, I found an article where CNN actually tells the truth. And where is this now? Why are we not hearing all of this conversation in a form of debate on our national TV like we used to have? We used to hear debates about this sort of stuff back in the day when we had controversial issues that people weren't on board with, or maybe, a little old number like 100 million people that haven't taken it yet or whatever. I mean, that's 1/3 or nearly 1/3 of the population of the United States. It seems to me like you would want to try to figure out why they are hesitant and not just have, canned interviews with people that are not hesitant. Actually have some real interviews with some people that are hesitant about this thing and have seen some negative side effects and have questions. And we should be able to ask these questions here on our YouTube channels as well. I don't know what in the world's going on. I do know it's the NWO takeover, guys. As I've been saying all along, this is a communist-run NWO takeover, and they're at the helm of every leading industry that there is, including the internet. So I think things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. Prepare accordingly. I stand for liberty. I hope you do too. And until then, guys, we'll see you next time. Oh, let me know what you think of this down in the comments. Tell me did this evoke any emotions for you as I'm reading this stuff from the left? Let me know. I love reading your comments. Appreciate it. We'll see you next time.